Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Hyperion Hub, your meeting place for all things Disney. Now your hosts.
Hello and welcome to the Hyperion Hub. I'm John Alois and joined by Sean Dagenhart.
Hi.
And John Redling Schaefer.
Hey guys.
How are you guys doing?
I'm good.
Awesome. Sorry to throw a curveball at you. Hey, before we start the show.
That was not in the script.
Yeah, we can't answer the simple questions, John. Let's get to the hard stuff.
You know, you can get a hold of us at podcast@thehyperionhub.com. You can also send us a voice recorded message there. If you want to find us on social media, look for us on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter. We are at Hub Hyperion. All right. Let's kick things off with our Disney views and throw it over to John.
All right. Well, March 9th was a unique annual meeting of the shareholders of the Walt Disney Company. This year it was virtual. In years past, it has been at locations around the country. I had every intention of going a year or two ago when it was in St. Louis, but we ended up with an ice storm. But it's interesting to usually see what comes out of those, because clearly they're trying to impress not just the shareholders, but Wall Street. And that's why you usually see some big announcements. And this year, obviously, was a little bit different. You know, there's no crowd in the room to kind of feed off of, but there still were some announcements. And I know you guys each have some information that you have learned that was shared at that meeting. John, what did you learn?
So Disney is eligible to possibly open up Disneyland on April 1st. And they made the announcement that Bob Chapek made the announcement that Disneyland will be open by the end of April. This is wonderful news. They will open safely at 15% capacity. I know a lot of people in California are excited, and at least to start, only people who live in the state are going to be able to go to Disneyland, but it's a start.
And it's funny that, you know, I mentioned the effect on Wall Street. Forbes and Bloomberg and all of these financial companies immediately said, look at earnings and the stock price of Disney going up as California starts to reopen. So there's the direct relation right there. Sean, what have you heard?
Yeah, well, Bob Iger announced that he will for sure finally be stepping down at the end of this year. I believe December 31st, 2021 was the date. He's been the CEO since 2005, and actually, he stepped down last year, didn't he? But then when COVID hit and he kind of came back to help out Bob Chapek in that time and, you know, for the transition. And Iger was the sixth CEO of the company. The first one was Roy O. Disney. So in the past almost 100 years, there have only been 6 CEOs of that company. And that's just amazing.
It truly is. It truly is. And, you know, another big milestone coming is the 50th anniversary of Walt Disney World. And in conjunction with that, the actual date of October 1st, we are going to see the opening of Ratatouille and his adventure there at Epcot in the France Pavilion. That ride already exists at Disneyland Paris, so if you want to not ruin the surprise, don't look at all the YouTube videos of it, but I'm very excited. It kind of builds off some of the technology we already see in Minnie and Mickey's Runaway Railway over in Hollywood Studios with the kind of the free-flowing movement of the vehicles without tracks. Also coming out of that meeting in the fall is the Hope. Now, that's a hope. There was no guarantee that the Disney Cruise Line will be back, and hopefully, who knows how full, but hopefully sailing very soon.
This week, we're looking at the history of Disney video games. Now, we all had consoles when we were kids. What did you guys have at home? What did you start with?
Atari was our first. I remember coming home from church one night, and my grandparents had got my brother and me an Atari system, and it was the best thing in the world.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. One of my close friends had that. I did not have that. I had Intellivision, which was supposed to be graphics step up, but they didn't have as many games as Atari did.
Man, you guys are old. Listen to this.
What did you have? PlayStation 4?
Right. I started with the PS5. No, I had a Nintendo, and I beat that thing to death by the time. I mean, even blowing into the cartridges didn't work towards the end there, but that was the game console that my folks bought, and that was, you know, you break it, you buy your next one. So I tried to treat it with kid gloves at first, but I loved it.
The at-home video game console goes back to the 1970s with the Magnavox Odyssey, making its debut in 1972. That's before all of us, John. The big name to emerge a few years later was Atari. Its 2600 revolutionized the industry. While Disney didn't immediately jump into the video game craze, they did release a movie in 1982 that was perfect for the genre. And of course, I'm referring to Tron. Tron, the game, was created for arcades. And sidestep here, for those who don't know, we used to have places to go before you were able to play at home where you could pay to play coin-operated video games, and not just off of hotel lobbies or in bars and restaurants. These were facilities that just had video games, and that was it. And they were a ton of fun. We had Friar Tuck's where I grew up, by the way.
We had Aladdin's Castle. That's where we went over at Northwoods Mall. I remember that, and so kids would have birthday parties there. It wasn't a Showbiz. It wasn't a Chuck E. Cheese. No, it was just video games.
But the Star Wars game at Showbiz was amazing. You had to wait in line for that one.
The one where you'd sit in, and it was like a TIE Fighter game or X-Wing?
Yes.
Yeah. Even if you had an at-home console, as you're saying, Sean, games at the arcades had much higher quality graphics and story, and just about everything else was better about them. Produced by Bally Midway in 1982, Tron featured the light cycles and the battle tanks. You may remember the light cycles would create walls, and you would try to cut off your opponent and survive the grid. A year later, they released a sequel called The Discs of Tron. The at-home version was the first Disney video game created for home on a personal console called Tron Deadly Discs, and it was produced for Mattel's Intellivision. This was by far one of my favorite games next to World Championship Baseball. I played it for hours. Your goal was to vaporize or de-res your opponents with your disc. Simple as that. You could use the disc as a shield as well. The sound effects are burned into my memory.
So will you be fighting to be the first in line at the new Tron ride at Disney World when it opens?
Yeah, it's based on Tron Legacy, and if it's going to hold the same charisma as the one in Shanghai does,
right,
I will definitely be on it as soon as I can. In 1983, Atari produced the first ever Disney video game featuring Mickey Mouse in Sorcerer's Apprentice. It was a single-player game where you helped Mickey prevent the cavern from flooding by stopping the falling stars that turned into brooms. There were many games produced in the 1980s featuring the Disney characters. Then in 1988, under Michael Eisner, the company decided to create its own video game division called Disney Interactive Studios, but it had many names throughout its 28 years of existence. They would produce games for consoles, handheld devices, and eventually mobile. It didn't start off on the right foot and struggled at times, but through third-party developers, there were a few hits in the early to mid-90s. Aladdin and The Lion King were huge for the company in 93 and 94, and yes, it helped that the movies did well, but the games were very popular. This ushered in a new era where Disney put the brakes on self-developing and publishing and switched to funding projects with third parties. As video game consoles evolved through the 1990s, so too did the storytelling in richer and longer formats. Popular games during this era were DuckTales for Nintendo Entertainment System, where the player takes Scrooge McDuck across the world in search of 5 treasures, Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse for the Sega Genesis, where Mickey would attempt to save Minnie from the evil witch Mizrabel, Mickey Mania, the timeless adventures of Mickey Mouse on various platforms, which allowed the player to navigate through classic Mickey cartoons as the mouse himself. And Tron 2.0, again, many platforms. While not canon to the film franchise, it continues where the original movie left off 20 years before. In 2002, Buena Vista Games collaborated with the Japanese-based company Square Enix to create one of the most popular series of video games of all time. Created originally for the PlayStation 2, Kingdom Hearts was eventually ported to many platforms. It's an action role-playing game where Final Fantasy characters combine with Disney characters. It features Sora, who fights evil alongside Goofy, Donald, and others. It sold 1 million copies in the U.S. in the first year and would go on to inspire 15 sequels in various formats. In 2010, Disney put a new spin on an old character and released Epic Mickey for the Nintendo Wii. With a slightly new, slimmed-down look, Mickey accidentally damages a world created by sorcerer Yensid, then has to help repair it, repainting damaged areas using his paintbrush while fighting off bad guys. This game reached back in Disney's history with many classic characters, including Clarabelle Cow, Horace Horsecollar, the Gremlins from a 1940s Disney comic book, the Mad Doctor from a 1933 short, and of course, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. In fact,